Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're totally bypassing the tabloid sensationalism to look strictly at the primary evidence and the actual legal outcomes of the Michael Jackson allegations. We're relying on court records, FBI files, and sworn testimony to see what the documentary record genuinely proves.
All right, let's just get right into it. The reason we're examining this record today, literally decades after the headlines first hit, is that two men are currently suing Jackson's companies for a reported $400 million in a civil trial slated for February 2028. This isn't just historical trivia. It's a live, ongoing litigation with massive, massive financial stakes.
To unpack all this, we're going to quickly hit the $400 million question, the initial 1993 allegations, that massive 2005 criminal trial, the empty forensic record, the case against Jackson, and finally, reaching a final verdict. Starting off with Section 1, the $400 million question, and mapping out these allegations.
It helps to look at this whole thing like a giant puzzle with three distinct eras over a 30-year saga. We've got the initial August 1993 Jordan Chandler investigation, the November 2003 arrest and subsequent 2005 criminal trial of Gavin Arvizo, and finally, the post-2013 civil claims filed by Wade Robson and James Safechuck that have led us straight to the upcoming 2028 trial.
Moving right into Section 2, the 1993 first allegation and its origins in a custody dispute. Now, when we look at that very first 1993 case involving 13-year-old Jordan Chandler, the defense's entire foundation rests heavily on a bitter adult custody and financial dispute. Weeks before any allegations surfaced to authorities, the boy's father, Evan Chandler, was recorded making a phone call, literally saying everything is going according to a certain plan. If I go through with this, I win big time. There is no way that I lose. Defenders are quick to point out that this recording heavily frames the upcoming confrontation as a financially motivated extortion plan, with demands reportedly hitting $20 million, rather than a genuine child protection issue.
And here's something absolutely crucial. The defense notes that the boy's initial detailed allegation was made right after receiving sodium amytal. That's a barbiturate sedation, basically truth serum, administered by his father and an anesthesiologist. This is a huge deal because sedatives severely compromise memory reliability, making it a highly contaminated disclosure from a forensic standpoint. Ultimately, after massive investigations spanning two whole counties, two separate 1994 grand juries heard the evidence, and 0 indictments were returned by either jury. The prosecution just declined to press charges after a civil settlement was reached, and the boy declined to testify.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 2005 criminal trial, People versus Jackson.
This is the one and only time these allegations were ever actually tested in an adversarial courtroom setting, stemming from the 2003 claims of Gavin Arvizo. So the defense hit on a massive timeline impossibility here. The prosecution's charges locked them into a specific window of time in early 2003. This meant jurors were required to believe Jackson began abusing the boy only after the infamous Martin Bashir documentary aired globally. Think about that for a second. A broadcast that placed Jackson under the most intense child abuse scrutiny on earth, with social workers interviewing the family and journalists practically camping outside his home. Jurors later cited the sheer implausibility essential to their reasonable doubt. During this trial, the prosecution was permitted to present past alleged victims to try and establish a pattern of behavior. But amazingly, 3 of the prosecution's own named past victims, including Wade Robson, took the stand to testify under oath for the defense, explicitly denying any abuse. It's a crazy turn of events. In total, the jury heard from about 140 witnesses, spanning an absolutely exhausting 14 weeks of intense testimony and cross-examination. And during those 14 weeks, the accusing family's credibility was just devastated. The mother invoked the Fifth Amendment regarding welfare fraud, their stories shifted all over the place, and a prior fabricated claim settlement against a department store came to light. All of this resulted in exactly 0 convictions, not a single one. The jury acquitted Jackson on every single count, and they even declined to convict on lesser misdemeanor charges, like furnishing alcohol to a minor. It was, for sure, a total legal collapse for the prosecution. Let's pivot to Section 4, the empty forensic record, searches and seizures. Let's see how this builds with the physical evidence, or, to be more precise, the complete absence of it across multiple decades. Despite massive searches, including a 70-person multi-agency raid in 2003 that seized computers, videos, and journals from Neverland Ranch, and a 300-plus page FBI file released detailing assistance to investigations spanning over a decade, authorities found 0 physical evidence corroborating any abuse. No illicit material, no photographs. The forensic record was completely, 100% empty.
But, to remain perfectly objective in our analysis here, we really must stop and ask, does an empty forensic record and a criminal acquittal explicitly guarantee innocence? Because the reality is, much real abuse leaves absolutely no physical trace, and acquittals simply mean guilt wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt in that specific trial.
That takes us straight into Section 5, the case against Jackson, looking at the counter-arguments and opposing evidence. To answer that last question, we have to clinically examine the prosecution's strongest points. You really can't evaluate a defense without hearing the counter-evidence. 3 super compelling points emerge here. First, the 1994 civil settlement. While the defense says it was just an insurance-driven maneuver with no admission of guilt, paying an estimated $15.3 million to the Chandlers and later $2.4 million to another claimant looks incredibly suspicious. Second, while Robson denied abuse under oath in 2005, clinical research strongly validates delayed disclosure as a common reality for abuse survivors. And third, despite 0 convictions, Jackson made unapologetic, on-camera admissions to serial bed sharing with unrelated children. Those are boundary violations that are, by any child safeguarding standard today, entirely indefensible. Zooming in specifically on the men behind the current $400 million lawsuit, the defense points heavily to a sharp contrast in behavior. Wade Robson emphatically denied abuse under oath in 2005 as a 22-year-old adult. He only filed his lawsuit post-2013, with court discovery showing this came right after he unsuccessfully pitched a book and was rejected for a highly lucrative Michael Jackson tribute directing job with Cirque du Soleil. The defense argues this screams financial motive.
But hang on, because the opposing side rightly points directly to the clinical literature on delayed disclosure. This is a very real, documented phenomenon where genuine survivors frequently deny abuse for years, often internalizing responsibility to protect their abuser through grooming, and they only disclose it decades later. Often this happens after the abuser's death or when having children of their own, which is exactly the trajectory Robson described. In this view, his swoon 2005 denial isn't proof of perjury. It's actually perfectly consistent with the psychology of abuse survival.
All right, bringing it all home with Section 6, reaching a final verdict, the verdict of history. Let's bring all this evidence together to understand exactly where the historical and legal record stands today as we approach 2028. The honest summary of our explainer is conditional. The defense undeniably holds a much stronger documented hand than tabloids usually imply. But the clinical reality is that acquittals and unindicted investigations only mean guilt wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't affirmatively certify absolute innocence. Crucially, the upcoming 2028 civil trial will be decided under a preponderance of the evidence standard. That means they only have to prove it's more likely than not that abuse occurred, which is a much lower burden of proof than the criminal trial, and it's against corporate defendants, not Jackson himself. So, here's the final question I want to leave you with today. Will this lower burden of proof in the 2028 trial finally write a definitive end to this entire 30-year saga? Or will the truth, layered under decades of settlements, shifting testimonies, and empty forensic files, remain forever contested? Thanks for diving into this explainer with me.